good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Whatever time this finds you, I just want to say hello and say that you are being loved for and prayed for, even though I will not be with you this Sunday. Because this Sunday, I will be down in North Carolina doing the wedding for Ariane and Hunter, and I'm then celebrating our vacation afterwards. So this is a pre-recorded sermon, but I want to just let you know that you are still being loved for and prayed for, even though we may be miles and miles and miles away. As you can tell, and as you may know, whenever you plan a trip, like we are planning this trip down to North Carolina, I am one of the people who purposely plans my leaving time, my arrival time, my travel time, based off of when I think I will encounter traffic. I purposely try to leave at a certain point in time that I will not run into traffic. This is especially true whenever we are going down to anywhere south of Washington, D.C., as we will be this coming weekend. Because if you've ever been traveling south or north and been caught in DC traffic, you know that it is absolutely painful. Whenever there's no traffic, I-95 is a beautiful, quick route from Pennsylvania down to Virginia and the Carolinas. However, whenever there is traffic, 95 becomes a parking lot and is absolutely frustrating and annoying. And so I purposely, whenever I plan my trips, purposely plan around rush hour to purposely avoid that. And the reason why I do this is I am not a patient driver. I've said this multiple times, but whenever I'm behind the wheel, I am not very patient. I'm not very calm, cool, and collected. I'm getting better as I get older. Having a kid made a huge difference, but I still am not quite as calm and collected as I like to be. And I admit, I am not the most patient person when it comes to this. And this doesn't just extend to driving. I'm also not necessarily the most patient person in other areas of my life as well. I oftentimes, if I feel someone's doing a job too slowly, I'm tempted to take over and do it myself. In fact, if there's ever a time whenever I think, Alyssa's taking too long to get ready, I sometimes am tempted to leave without her. In fact, just within the last week, we were going somewhere, and I got myself dressed and ready. I got Caleb packed up with Alyssa's help. Caleb and I were both packed and ready, and then Alyssa decided that she needed to change her outfit. And so me being my normal patient, gracious self, waited patiently for her to get ready. Is what I would say if I would have done this right. But I didn't do that. I was very impatient, very selfish, and I simply grabbed Caleb in the car seat, threw it, and put him in my car, and Caleb and I drove to where we were going by ourselves, and let Alyssa drive by herself coming afterwards when she finally got ready. The foolish part about that was, it's not like Alyssa showed up a half hour later or an hour later. She showed up minutes behind us simply because I was too patient to wait for her. And my foolishness shone through. So yes, as you may have guessed today, we are going to talk about patience. For we are continuing on this series out of Galatians 5, how do we truly embody our faith? How do we truly embody these elements of faith, these fruit of the Spirit in such a way? And I think we've walked this in the sense of saying our faith should be so evident and obvious, so powerfully a part of us that we seem different, we seem weird, we seem strange to those around us. And we talked about how we should love in a way that is very selfless, in a way that is very optimistic and hopeful, in a way that truly believes the best of someone. We talked about how we should be joyful even whenever we are not happy. This idea of having the joy of the Lord, the confidence of the Lord, that whenever things may go south. We talked about this idea of peace and purposely not being divisive with one another and actually truly living in peace. And then last week we talked about this idea of how do we heal, and how we heal by using humility and prayer first before anything else. But today we're going to get back to the Galatians 5 passage and talk about the next fruit of the Spirit. So we got love, joy, peace, and the next one is patience. And so again, I admit, patience is something I often struggle with. I'm not a very patient person. It's something that I'm working on, but I admit I'm nowhere near perfect on this. And I'm sure many of us have heard of and been taught that we are called to be patient. It's not an uncommon thing to know that we are supposed to be patient. In fact, there's multiple scriptures that tell us this very thing. They read, tell us to be patient. If you flip through your Bible and read, for any length of time, you'll eventually find something that tells us to be patient, to be calm, to be collected, to bear with one another. In fact, I got a handful of scriptures here that I will read for you and tell us this. 2 Timothy 2, starting in verse 22, says, "Flee from youthful passions, pursue righteousness, Goes on to say, have nothing to do with foolish, ignorant controversies. And then goes on down here and says, verse 24, the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but must be kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, correcting his opponents with gentleness. This idea of patiently enduring evil, and whenever we correct, do so gently and peacefully. We see Ephesians 4 says, always be humble and gentle, be patient with each other, making allowance for each other's fault because of your love. Colossians 3 talks about clothing ourselves with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, and patience. Make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember that the Lord first forgave you, so you must forgive others. We've been, like I said, many of us have heard multiple times this idea that we are called as Christians to be patient, to bear with one another, to truly love one another in a way that we are patient. But I think sometimes this is very difficult to do, even though we've also been told the benefits of being patient. If you read out of Proverbs 14, it talks about being slow to anger, and how whoever is slow to anger has great understanding. This idea of being hasty is an example of folly. Idea of being slow to anger and quick to overlook an offense. This idea of, we've been told about the benefits of patience. We've been told to be patient. But what I want to talk about today is a little bit more than just simply telling you to be patient. I don't simply want to say, you should be patient because the Bible says so. Because I think that's a point that we already know. We know full well that we are supposed to be patient. I know full well I'm supposed to be patient, but I'm just not. And so just being told to be patient, just having someone say, you better be patient because you're a Christian, doesn't do much. And so I want us to actually dive a little deeper and make a deeper point. And so this is my point. This is the point I want to make. This is one point I want to make clear. This is the point I want to convey to all of us and challenge all of us with. Not only are we called to patience, not only are we told as Christians to be patient, I firmly believe that our patience is evidence of our faith. That the two are deeply intertwined, that the two are dependent upon each other, and that if we truly have faith, if we truly have the Spirit of God living within us, if we truly are embodiments of our faith, we will be patient. And whenever we show ourselves to be impatient, to be very selfish in our desires, we show our lack of faith. And so I have a couple scriptures I want to share with you that go along this line. This idea of not only is patience important, but it is evidence of our faith. And so the first one I want to read out of is James 1. So James 1, we're going to start here in verse, we're going to start here in verse, I believe, 2. James 1, 2 through 4. Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow, for when your endurance is fully developed, you'll be perfect and complete, needing nothing. Now again, this passage doesn't expressly state doesn't expressly state patience. However, we're talking about this idea of whenever there's a testing, whenever there's a trouble, whenever there's something that's going wrong, consider a chance for joy and a testing of our faith. If we read through the scriptures, if we read through different accounts of different biblical examples, we'll see this idea of whenever our faith is tested, whenever there's something that goes wrong in our life, or there's something that doesn't happen on our time frame, it then becomes a test of patience, but also a test of faith. The two are deeply intertwined. The first example I want to turn your attention to is Abraham. Abraham is this great father of the Israelite nation. He has this amazing relationship with God, and God promises him that one day his descendants will be as numerous as the sands on the seashore. Now, if you've ever been to this beach and ever, sat down in the sand, you know that it's impossible to count those sands. In fact, if you're ever at a beach, take about just one handful of sand and try to count every grain of sand in your hand. And then multiply that by the entire length of the beach. The promise God gives to Abraham is your descendants will be as numerous as the sand on the entire seashore. However, Abraham and his wife Sarah start growing older. They're increasing in age, and they're over the hill. They're starting to come back down the other side of the hill, and they still don't have any children. Sarah is still not able to have children. Abraham and Sarah do not have a child, and so they start to get a little impatient. And so they start to wonder, Lord, what's going on here? What's going on? Why is this not happening? And they start to become impatient with God's plan for their lives. They become impatient with God. They could become impatient with the situation. And so what they do is they have Abraham sleep with a servant girl in order to have a child and try to make God's will happen in that way. And it works to a certain extent. The woman gets pregnant. Abraham has a son. However, this is kind of almost messes with or changes the original plan a little bit, to the sense of this son is not the promised son. And so as you see, eventually we have this amazing conflict that comes out of this act of impatience. Because later in life, even later, they are nearing in 100, closing in on 100, and an angel comes to them and says, hey, you are going to have a kid. And so then at the grand old age of 100 or thereabouts, they have Isaac. And they finally have this child of the promise. However, we see the conflict that then arises between Ishmael, the son to the servant woman, and Isaac. Because Abraham is impatient and Sarah is impatient, they try to do it themselves. We have examples of Moses and the Israelites. And they finally get out of Egypt. They're walking out of Egypt, walking to the desert. They come up to the promised land. They finally make it to the promised land, to this thing that they've been promised for so long. Actually, the promise that was given back to Abraham and his children, that they eventually would come back to that land. It's been 400 years, and they finally are on the cusp of that land. And they send spies in to check out the land, and the spies say that land is tough. The people there are well fortified and they're huge. And so the Israelites become terrified because they don't feel like they can militarily, by their own might, take this area. And so they become terrified, and so they decide that they can't do it. And so God says, no, now you're going to wander in the desert for 40 years. But some people say, okay, no, we're going to do it now. We're going to do it by ourselves. We're going to force our way in, because they don't want to wait 40 years. They wanted God to do something then and there. They want something to happen right then and there. But it didn't work that way. And so they go up and try to take the promised land by their own power, on their own timeline, in their own way of thinking. And they said, we want to do it right now. We don't want to wait for God's plan. We don't want to listen to what he has to say. We're going to do it right now. We are impatient. We want it now. And what they do is they go up to fight that land, and they are defeated. They lose a battle that they should have won. They lose a battle that they had been promised to win before, because they try to do it in their own timeline. They try to do it in their own power. They try to do it in their own impatience. On the contrary, we have the example of David. A couple weeks ago, I talked about how David refused to take the life of the previous king, King Saul, because he believed in God's timing. He believed in God's power to bring it about. David was even given multiple opportunities to kill Saul, including the example I talked about the other week, whenever Saul was legitimately going to the bathroom in a cave, and David had a chance to take his life. But David says, no, I'm not going to jump the gun. I'm not going to force the issue. I'm not going to enforce my own timeline. I am going to trust God, because I have faith that his plan will come about if I'm just patient enough to let it happen. And so then we see David eventually become king. I say all these examples not just to show that I know biblical stories. That's not my point at all. My point is to say this idea of being impatient and not wanting to wait for God's timing is not something new. It's not something that we just ourselves have come up with. It's not something that our modern culture has imposed on us. No, people have been impatient from the very dawn of time. And from the very dawn of time, we have wanted to do it on our own time. We wanted to do it in our own way. Every time we want to do something, we often say, Lord, can we do it on our timing? When we pray for a loved one, when we say, Lord, can you heal my grandmother? We say, what we are actually saying is that, Lord, can you heal her right now? And then whenever that healing doesn't come whenever we want it, whenever that healing doesn't immediately come, whenever God's timing is not our timing, what do? We have a choice to make in that moment. Whether or not we will have patience and say, Lord, I believe your promise that eventually you will bring this to a peaceful conclusion, or we have a chance, or we can say, Lord, I want it now. Whenever we come to the Lord and say, Lord, can you lead, God, direct my career choice? And he says, and we don't get an answer right away. Do we have the faith to wait? Whenever we firmly believe something and the people around us don't believe it, do we have the patience to bear with them? Whenever we have been hurt by someone and we earnestly want them to come to us and ask for forgiveness or make amends, whenever we have extended an olive branch out to someone and said, Lord, I want to establish a relationship, and they refuse to move forward with us, do we have the patience and faith to wait? Oftentimes, I think the answer is no. Oftentimes, I think the answer is no. We want it on our own time. We don't have the patience often to wait. And I think that shows in some ways our lack of faith. For I claim to believe that God is able to do all things. I claim to believe that God is able to work within the hearts and lives of others. I claim to believe that God is able to heal and bring about reconciliation. I claim all these things, but what my life says is I want it now. I believe it has to happen now. That's in my impatience, I often try to do things on my own, to force it to happen, like Abraham did, or like the Israelites did. It is very rare in our culture to actually have the patience and actually have the faith, like David, to say it's on God's timing. And so this next few months is going to try a lot of our patience. Many of us are saying, I want the coronavirus shutdown to be ended right now. Some of us are saying, I want the racial strife to be done right now. Some of us are saying, I want racism in general just to be done right now. Lord, I don't want the hurt to be done right now. Lord, I want this person to be healed right now. I want my friendship with this person to be reconciled right now. I want everything right now. And the fact of the matter is, not everything is going to happen right now. Sometimes we have to wait. So the question that becomes to me is, in our waiting, whenever we are being told by God, and that's not going to happen right now, whenever we don't see immediate results, do we have the faith to be patient, or do we try to start doubting God's goodness and providence? Do we have the faith and the patience to wait upon the Lord and follow his guidance, or do we try to force it by ourselves? Do we have the faith and the patience to actually say, Lord, I still trust you, I still believe in you, I still need you, even in the waiting? I mean, it's not easy. It's not easy to say, Lord, I'm willing to wait. It's not easy to say, I'm willing to trust your timing. It's not easy to be patient. But I believe that whenever we become impatient, whenever we start to doubt if things are ever going to happen, whenever we start to try to do it on our own without God's blessing, whenever we say it has to happen now, we throw a little temper tantrum like a toddler, we show our lack of faith. In fact, I want to go back to that example. Right now, my son Caleb is 9 months old. And so he's in a stage where he has associated things that he likes and things that he wants. One of his things that he likes the most right now are little cheese puffs. Those little baby cheese puffs. So anytime he sees that container, whenever he sees that carton, he says, I want them now. And if I don't give them to him right that second, he starts to scream and yell at me. Because he is not patient. And he wonders if I don't scream, if I don't throw a temper tantrum, will I even get them at all? He doesn't have faith that eventually I'm going to give them to him. And that's normal for his age. But it's not normal for mature Christians. So it's a humbling fact that I have to realize that whenever I don't get my spiritual equivalent of a cheese puff, whenever my prayer isn't answered immediately, whenever my desires don't come immediately, whenever people don't seem to get it like I want them to, whenever the decisions that I want people to make don't happen, whenever things I want to happen don't happen on my timeline, do I have the faith, maturity to be patient? Or am I just a little toddler screaming for a cheese puff? And I have to admit, a lot of times, I'm a little toddler screaming for a cheese puff. A lot of times, whenever things don't go my way or things don't happen on my timeline, I start to freak out. I start to doubt. I start to throw a temper tantrum. Whenever things don't happen when I think they should, I start to doubt whether or not it's going to happen ever. But what I'm slowly realizing, and I hope we all will realize, is that this idea of patience is actually evidence of our faith. That whenever we say, okay, I'm going to be patient, I believe it's eventually going to happen, we actually evidence a deep, mature Christian faith. And the flip side of that's also true. Whenever we throw our pity parties, whenever we throw our little tantrums, whenever we act like a toddler, we actually show a lack of faith. And therefore, my point this morning is just about that simple. Yes, the scriptures tell us you should be patient. Yes, Proverbs tells us, again, the benefits of being patient. But my point this morning is very simple. Faith and patience go hand in hand. So much so that I firmly believe that patience is one of the most powerful ways we can evidence faith. This idea of I am willing to be patient with myself, willing to be patient with others, willing to be patient with God, even when things aren't going my way. So this morning we have a choice. And the choice is to try to enforce our own timeline and to doubt God, to whine at God, to cry and complain and throw a pity party and a tantrum, and to try to force our wills upon God and others, or to have the faith to be patient.